Hello and welcome to the Novel Brain with Dr. E. Today I'm going to be discussing what's happening to our brains in situations such as COVID-19 and the recent protests across America and the world. So stay tuned. So, welcome back. I know that a lot of us are in tremendous amounts of stress, and I'm not going to go over all the different reasons why today because I think we all know where we are. It's the middle of June in 2020, and many of us had probably not thought that this is where we're going to be, but that's exactly why I'm doing this podcast today. Is I want to talk a little bit about what's happening to your brain and why it might not be feeling optimal or just maybe even minimally put, maybe it's just not operating the same way you thought it might. So here are some thoughts for you. We have more decisions to be made in this new time, this new era, in a compounding sense of stress from COVID-19 as well as these protests, whether you've been participating or whether you are actively engaging with your community. The truth is that it's kind of taking what I would say a little bit of a hijack from our brain, from our daily tasks. And this is particularly in the areas of our prefrontal cortex, which are our headquarters for decision making, and they control our higher level executive functioning. All these include things like our attention and creating and organizing our thoughts and setting goals, planning actions, putting a stop to impulsive thoughts and behaviors. And so the list goes on. The prefrontal cortex is in many ways being redirected to planning all the actions of survival and all the actions of what's going to be put on my table at this end of the day for food, and how do I navigate the grocery store, and can I manage my own anxiety. So under normal or mild stress conditions, the brain uses something that's called working memory to regulate our moods and our actions from the top down. And this is not in any way a lesson in physiology or brain anatomy, but the top down being where the activity occurs in your brain as we are running our daily activities. So working memory essentially marries the recent events that are occurring with memories from long-term storage about what we learned from any given experience. And then it uses this sort of marriage to make decisions about how we're going to act, think, and then feel based on our experiences. So many of us have lived through other pandemics or maybe even world wars and 9/11, for example. And I'm thinking of our current sort of Generation Z who have really just seen this all over and over online, which I can't stress enough can be very harmful to some decision-making processes, because what we're doing is we're virtually reliving memories. And so when your working memory marries this sort of recent events, what you see on the news, and just makes some kind of connection or some kind of, basically just looks at your long-term storage and says, this is how I'm going to react. So those of us who have gone through some trauma before are actually better prepared to go through what's happening now. So this is why experience is everything. The brain, for example, will constantly estimate risk. Now, if you hadn't had any reason to be taking risks in the past, or you hadn't been able to, or maybe hadn't gone through any kind of major trauma, which is very rare these days, then your brain is new to this, and this is all very novel to you. So training your brain to take these recent events and redefine what that means. So this is different. This is a novel coronavirus. This is novel protesting compared to those in 1968, where everybody was siding with the police. Not everybody, but I mean, the people who weren't protesting were on the police side. Now, that's not the case now. We have a major event of protesting across the world, and we have support in not just police reform, but things such as defunding police. So we are now in a new area, and we have to look at this as experience building, using our working memory to regulate our moods and our actions. And one of the ways to do this, I've said before, is just through meditation, but just walking meditation is one way to combine that with your physiological exercise on a daily basis. And don't go huge. I think I know a few people who went out and bought Fitbits at the beginning of the sort of COVID-19 pandemic and thought that they would get outside and turn into walk athletes. And the truth is that you have to go moderate. Your brain is working its way through some of the most difficult events in my history and in most of our lifetime. All right, so what do I mean by the brain constantly estimating risk? Well, there's things like hunger, and discuss this in other podcasts such as Maslow's hierarchy of needs. What is that we need to stay alive? We need our shelter, we need water, we need food, all these things that give us energy to work throughout the day. So if you don't have these things, your brain is estimating the risk that you might not survive. So if you can't find the next meal, you're obviously going to have high risk of potentially losing your life or potentially losing your home, your family, whatever it is. That is the most important thing. So we have to work from the bottom up. Unlike working from the top down with our working memory, the hierarchy of needs is something that's essential for us to handle those basic needs first. So these are safety needs. These are things that are going to keep us alive, and these are things that are going to keep our loved ones safe. Now, if you're suffering from anxiety disorders, you may say, I'm not even going to risk getting in the car because I can't relax. So this is something like a computation game in some ways. Well, I can't relax. I can't leave the house. This is another level of human nature that actually shuts down and really affects your basic needs. Now you can't go and get the things that you need. So you might be spending a ton of money on getting food delivered, and then you don't have that money. So you might not get the basic needs put on your table. And this is where we really need to take care of our mental health in order to just even exist or survive. So the decision area of your brain really isn't fully mature until you're an adult. So obviously, we as adults, if you're listening and you're not an adult and you are part of an adolescent or preteen population, you know that this is why your parents are working, or your guardians are working towards helping you make these decisions, because your working memory and your prefrontal cortex is not fully developed. So, this is essentially why, another podcast again, but another reason why things happen and you're able to get your driver's license at age 16 or vote at age 18 throughout the U.S., drinking at 21. This is why these sort of regulations exist. Let's talk about stress. The prefrontal cortex is definitely the area of your brain that is most sensitive to stress. So even some mild stress can cause sort of rapid and dramatic loss of prefrontal cognitive abilities. So prolonged stress, which I went into my calendar the other day, and I think we're in the 80s, almost 90s, 90 days in sort of this self-pronounced quarantine, where now we're just being lifted out of in phase one here in DC and other parts of the country and world, have returned to somewhat a pseudo normal life. But with this prolonged stress, like let's just take, for example, 3 months of uncertainty and 3 months of potentially not having your regular life and your livelihood and your work is at risk, perhaps. Maybe your marriage and your family life has changed. This is definitely going to affect your prefrontal cognitive abilities. So the brain, when stressed all the time, has neurotransmitters that just go awry. And what they do, it floods the brain with chemicals that change the structure and the functioning of the prefrontal cortex. And then, in turn, fight or flight emotions and memory centers of the brain are now affected. So the one negative about this is something called cortisol, and it really is something that's flooding our brains. And I know that in this quarantine, I've written a number of sort of pre-articles, things that are just on their way to publication or potentially just something that I want to keep as perspective. And I've written a lot about cortisol, and this is the hormone in your brain that can basically flood and decrease your cognitive ability, and therefore your working memory suffers, your perceptual reasoning, even verbal comprehension may suffer. You might have some well thought out ideas, and then now you have this decline and maybe not even remember what that idea is from one moment to the next. So in general, your decision making slows down. So just be aware that this is occurring and it's not some kind of cognitive decline, hopefully for you. These things do occur over a lifetime, and there is some declination of cognitive skills. But in a time like a pandemic, including nationwide stress here in the United States and uncertainty of a future election that's just 5 months away, we really are having some difficulties with decision making. Cognitive decline is occurring. Cortisol levels are up. You could argue that we're really just still surviving and trying to get through to the next thing. But this combination of stress with sort of increased risk, perhaps, like now that I know that patios here in DC are opening, and wherever you are and listening to this, I'm thinking of just different scenarios I've read online or from different people I know across the country who are talking about the increased risk of being in public, and it just feels like sort of surreal. And to make that decision to join a group of people out doing regular things may feel like the right thing, but in addition, you're going to have this combined stress of fear, perhaps, of your own survival. I know as a parent, this is even heightened because you're not thinking just about yourself. You're thinking about being a caretaker, and your number one role is to be alive. So oftentimes, this combined stress of a pandemic, of protests, of uncertainty, and now of your own life perhaps being on the line is so heightened that this is why I'm speaking of it today. So what do we do next? Well, you give your brain a break from constant risk, and you give yourself the time to focus on what it is that you're going to do just for today. So it is a day-by-day situation. Your grandmother was right. You take things day by day. Now, if you have some anxiety busting activities, such as like a hobby that you found that is working, don't take it lightly and definitely dive in. And I'm not saying that this is just a time for that. This is good practice anyhow for your brain to be able to bust through anxiety and the cortisol levels, to ease the stress, just generally boost your mood and your mind. This all really works in conjunction with holistic medicine, and doing the things that we love are really physically beneficial as well. So if it's exercise that you do, you might even be stepping that up a bit. And I know earlier I said to be moderate. Well, that's for the beginners in the group, but if you are a regular exerciser, this might be your time to really focus even further on some more physical exercise goals. So just deep breathing, and I know that this is something that a lot of meditators across the world have talked about for centuries, is how breathing just does amazing things to our brain. It also subsequently really handles stress and anxiety just by the simple act of paying attention to that breath. So if you can really not get into meditation, maybe it's time for you to focus some on your breath. And there are quality breath workers out there who offer seminars, and a lot of this stuff's absolutely free of charge online, and you could really look into just focusing on your breath, and that does keep us in the present. So the whole idea of this podcast, if there's one thing that you take away from this, is that when you physiologically calm yourself, you actually change your brain waves. All right, so it's not only about neurotransmission, it's not only about heightened levels of cortisol, it's also about getting into different states. And for example, the alpha state of your brain, when you're sleeping and you go into REM, this is why we sleep in many ways, is to reset and recharge. So if you can calm yourself during the day, you'll notice that your heightened brainwave activity can be put into an alpha state where you can actually be productive and happy, and your mood will actually improve. So, of course, things like yoga, Tai Chi, Qigong, and spiritual disciplines of just reading and daily prayer or worship, anything of that sort, meditation, are designed to just sort of combine your body and your mind in a peaceful sense. Just physical posture, just sitting straight with breath regulation, mindfulness through sort of practice of meditation. All these have been proven in brain scan over brain scan to increase alpha, beta, and theta brainwave activity, suggesting that you're going to have some kind of increased relaxation and subsequently attentiveness. So the last thing I want to talk about is that we need to stop criticizing our brain for its own indecisiveness in a time of stress. We are our worst enemies, and we have to identify that this is what's happening. We're so critical to ourselves that we have to give ourselves a break, and it's very, very common for a brain to take its time to make a decision. Now, in these heightened, difficult times, and critical thinking is becoming a harder thing to do, just know that it's actually the brain's job to do this on a very base level. It just may take longer with more sort of variables in the decisions that you have to make. And the truth is that with some of these techniques and strategies that I've offered today, do consider that you really have to take care of you in order to take care of anyone else. So self-care is a priority, and mental health is health. So if we're not taking care of these things, well, we're really just doing an injustice and an inservice to the people that we love. So as always, take care of yourself. Again, Dr. E with the Novel Brain will be continuing more episodes in the near future, and these are all going to be about positive reinforcement and how we can reinforce all the skills that we've learned in this difficult time. So be well all. Take care.